There are two extraordinarily important qualities for each person to have: honesty and sincerity. Each and every person has to make a choice on a day-to-day basis whether or not they're going to be honest with themselves, and even more important than that, honest with God. What is their inner state of being overall? In that same spirit of honesty, I had an inner dialogue with myself a couple of weeks ago where I realized that it's crucially important for myself to do things which I truly believe in. One of those things that came into mind really quickly was the realization that inside me I'm filled with the Spirit and love of God so much that I just wish I could share it with everyone I know. And since this is the first video you're going to watch on my YouTube channel, you need to know that this is precisely the entire reason for why I'm starting this and why I'm doing this. To share my story and how Jesus helped me overcome addictions, challenges, battles with sin, and share with you all the things that I learned from the Bible in depth, because man, this is a book that it's so unbelievable, it really challenges your faith. Here is my story. My family is a very loving one. Both my parents are in ministry, they're leaders of a church, they're pastors, and for as long as I can remember, I've been loved, cherished, and supported. As we can all agree, the environment in which somebody grows up in is of crucial importance for the person that they are to become later on in life. However, sooner or later, you begin to make the decisions for yourself, by yourself. And since I have been, ever since I can remember, a person who loves to experiment, and then as a kid I was surrounded by people who encouraged those experiments, even though that they may have been not very wise, especially at the time, I just found myself in a position where the love which I found from my family and from my parents was not enough for me, and I started desiring more and more to be admired by the people around me, my friends and family and classmates. And since I loved experimenting, even for my own sake, what happened is I started smoking cigarettes at the age of 9. At the age of 10, just 1 year later, I started smoking weed. It was not the most pleasant experience, and I stopped pretty soon. But not long after that, I started drinking, and at the age of 11 was the first time where I actually got drunk. Soon after that, at the age of 12, I started smoking weed again, and not only that, but soon I began to do it more and more, to the point where I got addicted. I know that some people say you can't get addicted to weed, but that was not my experience. Obviously, I did not have money to buy weed for myself, so what I did is I started stealing money from my parents without them knowing, and I started smoking every single day. A few years after that, I started drinking regularly, to the point where my daily routine consisted of waiting throughout the entire day in boredom until the evening comes and I can get drunk, sometimes with my friends, sometimes by myself, sitting on some random benches at the park, staring at the nothingness in front of me. Overall, it's safe to say that in my teenage years, I tried everything I can to escape the reality which I was in. If I did not have any substances such as alcohol and weed and cigarettes which I can use, I watched movies hours and hours at a time, sometimes 5 movies a day. And since several different times throughout my teenage years, my parents caught me doing the things that I just mentioned, I often found myself in a position where I was grounded, where I was punished. This, of course, left me feeling even more unwanted as a kid, as a teenager, misunderstood, and I just kept feeling like I'm the black sheep of the family. Like my brothers and sisters are just so perfect. The kids and people at the church are flawless. They don't do the things that I did. And that, of course, deepened the problem which I was feeling inside. And when a person feels unwanted, lonely, and unaccepted, it's really easy to be influenced by the first people that come and by the first environment that you find yourself to be in. And of course, if that environment is made out of people who accept you the way that you are, and you're told, hey, what you do is not that bad. We can actually support you in the things that we're doing. We can all do it together. We can get drunk. We can use alcohol. We can take drugs. It's very easy to give in to the influence that this environment provides. And what I'm observing by working with teenagers for years now is that when you have a case of somebody who is misbehaving, somebody who may be influenced by the wrong people, who enjoys giving in to sin, whether it would be drugs, homosexuality, identity issues, and all of these things, it's not so much that this itself is the problem. Rather, this is a way to mask and even to forget the issue that is actually at hand. I did not have any problems with smoking. Smoking is disgusting anyways. However, this was the way which I used to escape the unhealthy reality which I did not really want it to be in. There is a very interesting experiment involving American soldiers. To put it briefly, during the Second World War, some soldiers somehow got access to heroin, and obviously they became addicted to it pretty quickly. After 100% of those who were addicted to heroin during the war, only 5% of them continued using heroin after they came home to the United States. At first glance, this is extremely strange and unusual. Heroin is known to be the most addictive substance on earth in general, extraordinarily hard to quit. However, the reality is that when these soldiers came home to the environment where their families are surrounding them, they are loved, appreciated, cherished for the work that they did for the country. They got back to their jobs, hobbies. The need to escape your reality disappeared really quickly. Not only that they stopped using the drug, but the habit of needing that drug, the abstinence of it, abruptly was cut off, meaning as soon as they returned home, they ceased all use. I'm gonna tell you about another experiment, this time involving rats, as most experiments do. A group of rats were given cocaine-infused water. If the rat was alone in the cage, every time it accessed the water that had the cocaine in it, it consumed as much as possible. And what happened in the end is that all 100% of those rats died out of cocaine overdose. However, if there was only one extra rat with them in the cage, just to keep them company, the percentage of rats that used this cocaine-infused water dropped down to the mind-blowing 10%. Only 10% of those rats actually reached for the cocaine. The conclusion, which I believe is kind of clear for everyone, it's really easy for somebody to get addicted to something when this addiction is a way for them to escape the reality which they hate. The struggles of a person are different. They come in many shapes and forms. For some it's pornography, bad friends, drugs, alcohol. But the true question that we should all think about is, why on earth do we have a generation of young people today who are so desperate in their attempt to escape that reality which we live in? I can't speak for every single young person out there, but I can speak out of my own experience. The lack of meaning and purpose in my life, and that enormous void inside my mind, psyche, and spirit, despite all the attempts which I made trying to make my life more fun, those things did not go away. Funny enough, they became even worse. Sooner or later, depending on how well you manage to cover those wounds and learn how to function normally without actually paying attention to them, what's inevitable is that the weight that you're carrying begins to be unbearably heavy. A person gets into this vicious cycle of switching between hopelessness, shame, guilt, and a very strong sense of failure. And so this inner void only grows larger and larger. Although something personal about me is that I have a surgery where 17 inches of my back are fused together with titanium rods, I have had even darker days than the days in the hospital where I felt enormous pain. And those days were the days where I experienced so much hopelessness and inner pain that I spent hours and hours every single day in the garage of my parents, while everyone I knew was outside living their own lives, drinking alcohol, struggling with pornography, crying, and finding no meaning for the life which I have been given. And to this day, I believe that perhaps the heaviest and the most excruciating feeling one can experience is the feeling of absolute hopelessness. And what I hope today is that this video, by some divine providence, will reach people who maybe are feeling the exact same way. People who may hate themselves, who may see no purpose for their life. People who may be struggling with finding joy, even in those things that used to make them happy. People who only experience and see their life as one failure after another. And what I want to tell you today, if you find yourself in that position, is that the life which I'm living today has nothing to do with that life which I used to live before. I enjoy every single day, even though obviously not every day goes as planned. But today I'm not a slave of the pleasures which one may seek, and I don't want to escape my reality. And perhaps the most important thing is that I find inner peace, freedom, and love for the life which I've been given, for myself, and for the people which God has given me. Well, how did this happen? If I tried, for example, to prove to you the concept of gravity, the methods which I would use to try to prove this to you, that there is such a thing as gravity, would be based on experiments. If I took this microphone and I dropped it from here, every single time, no matter what happens, even if we try it 1 billion times, the mic would drop to the ground. Then you can even mathematically calculate what is going to happen the next time I drop the mic, which is fall to the ground. And thus this concept of gravity, that there is something which pulls down this microphone to the ground, would be proven. However, when we talk about trying to prove historical events, simple logic would suggest that this type of methods of experimenting until you find whether or not something is true are completely invalid in this situation. You cannot prove by experiment something that has already happened in the past. And the way that historical events are proven is by examining the number of witnesses who saw the actual event, what are the similarities in the stories which they tell, and what are the differences. How close was this account written or told to the actual event that happened? And then you see all of those witnesses' stories through different perspectives, and you make conclusions based on what you've got. Till this day, the very best historical document that has ever been recorded in all human history is the birth, life, and death, and after death, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And what makes this even more remarkable is that those historical events were prophesied by people, and I mean in very great detail, thousands of years before the events actually happened. According to his own words, first of all, he is God. Second point that he makes is that he is the only God that exists. And the third point he makes is that he is the author of everything, including you and I. Fourth, and really important one, is that this man claims that he wants a relationship with each and every person, no matter how flawed they may be. And finally, the fifth point, the only way that such a holy being as God can communicate with people who by themselves are full of evil from birth is if he himself dies, resurrects, and taking upon himself the punishment which we deserve for our sin, later on allowing us to continue living our lives now in a clean state and clean relationship with him. I know this may sound a little bit strange, but if you're planning to subscribe on this channel, you should get used to these types of topics. Back when I struggled with all of those things which I mentioned, for months and months at a time, I sought to understand who this person, Jesus Christ, was. Christ who claims to still be alive till this day and also to be God. Love is hard to prove, especially since it cannot be seen. You can't smell it, you can't touch it, but it's recognized by the results of it. In the same way, it would be an impossible challenge for me to explain or to prove or to show the relationship which I have with God, but the results of that relationship are absolutely undeniable by any parameter whatsoever. Earlier in my life, I truly believed that my life is pointless and that I'll never be anything worth something. And I believe that my life has no meaning. But today my life is completely different, and this is only because of the relationship which I have with Jesus Christ as my Lord and as my Savior. If you're interested in finding more about that freedom which I have, or if you want to know more about Christ and who He is and what the Bible says and teaches about them, and you want to understand the biblical wisdom and teachings, this will be the exact direction this channel takes from this point forward. My name is Faithful Tonchev, and Veren is the literal translation to the word faithful. I hope I am faithful today and that I will remain faithful, and I'm leaving you with this short message. Your life is valuable, and it's the death of Christ that makes it this way. I will be seeing you in the next video. Goodbye.